Bruchim Habayim, welcome friends to the department seminar for the Department of Jewish Art at Bar-Ilan University. We're very pleased this week to welcome Elya Assayag. I had the good pleasure of meeting Elya this summer in Jerusalem at Yad Ben Tzvi at a concert at a conference. It was like a concert, a conference of Jewish material culture. And I think it's safe to say that Elya's presentation was one of the hits of the conference. So she graciously agreed to join our seminar and participate. Elya Assayag is a PhD candidate in the history department of Columbia University. She studies the social history of Moroccan women during the 20th century. Due to a lack of written sources by and about women, Elya's research uses diverse methodologies in addition to archival research, such as oral history and material culture analysis. At the center of her study is the craft of Moroccan embroidery. This craft is used as a means to understand the shifts in knowledge transmission and aesthetic trends among women. Besides trying to figure out her academic path, Elya volunteers with refugees and asylum seekers and tries to do something useful with the law degree she obtained a few years ago. Welcome, Elya. I pass the floor on to you.
Thank you so much, Lior. Thank you for inviting me and organizing this amazing platform. I'll just share my presentation. And I'll say, just in advance, as I said a few minutes ago, I'm always very excited to talk, but having Richie Cohen here, which was one of my first professors, and one of the main reasons I arrived to material culture, I think. I don't know if he knows that, but I am very excited that he's here. So thank you, Richie, for honoring me and coming to my talk. So yeah, I think I'll jump right into that. And I'm just putting a timer because your questions are more important for me than my talk. I know my topic, and I think this platform is a great opportunity to hear from people from Judaic studies and specifically the artistic part of Judaic studies. And I would very much enjoy your comments. So yeah, I put here on the first page the picture of Asmor. I just want you to look at it and remember it because we'll reach to it in the end of the presentation. Asmor is a small town on the coastal shore of Morocco, 30 minutes drive from Casablanca. It's a magical place. It's my favorite place in Morocco. Part of it is that no one goes there. And it kind of preserved this, it's like a time capsule. It was preserved in time. There is amazing craftsmanship and craftswomanship there. So yeah, I open with that. Remember that, and we'll go back into it. So I think I in the past year, I was thinking how to open my lectures, how to open my talks, because we cannot ignore what happened in October 7th. We cannot ignore what we're going through now. And I started to collect all those projects that involves embroidery and commemoration and memory and healing. And I think, and it's not by coincidence that we saw a surge in crafts and DIY during COVID, during the world pandemic, and that we're just seeing this surge now. I'm a great believer that embroidery is healing, and embroidery is much more than just decoration. So in this discourse between arts and crafts, there is a lot of time this assigning of embroidery as this decorative art, but it's much more, and this is what I will try to show you through my project. This is what I'm trying to do in my dissertation, and I think, and I will not go through all these amazing projects that are happening, but I think a lot of people found a place to process their feeling, to process what they went through with the craft of embroidery. So just as an open remark. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I reached to the topic. So as you heard, I am a lawyer. And for many, many years, I did all kind of projects related to the history of law. North Africa was always my academic home, so I did all kind of things related to that. But I tried to combine my education in law and my love to history throughout the years until I reached to a barrier. It happened during COVID, and I think again this like surge in crafts and my love to craft kind of got me to look for my happy place. And the happy place wasn't legal procedures and domestic violence and all kind of stuff that I dealt with up until that point. My happy place apparently is embroidery. So I went to the library, the only one that was open around me, and I encountered this book that I put here. Morocco, it's in French, but the translation is Moroccan art embroidery. It was done by Prosper Ricard, which was the head of the Office of Indigenous Art in North Africa in general. And he had a love story with embroidery. So as part of this office, they did surveys of all kind of what they called traditional crafts in North Africa, weaving, pottery, and so on. But he was obsessed with embroidery, and he did this incredible survey. He started it in 1916, and the book was published in 1918 of all the type of Moroccan embroidery. And when I stumbled upon this book, I was feeling something else. And I decided to follow this intuition that maybe through embroidery I could tell a different historical narrative, a narrative that is not found in textual archives, a narrative that belongs to women that are usually missing from textual archives. So this is very shortly how I reached to this topic. And it's important for me to say a few things. So the story I'm going to tell you is a story that is focused on the colonial period. The formal colonial period in Morocco was from 1912 to 1956, but we will go a bit before and a bit after because the presence of Europeans and specifically French in Morocco was a bit earlier than the formal colonial regime. My study as a whole touches upon both the Jewish community and the Muslim community. In this talk, we will focus on the Jewish community, but I think it's very hard to separate them, those two communities, and we'll see it in the last example that I'll give in this talk. And historically, I think it's also a bit dangerous to separate the two because we can very easily go to those dichotomies that the colonial regime tried to create. So I'm just putting this in mind. We won't go too much deep into that. And as Lior said in my introduction, I use diverse methods. Archives are usually silent about women's history, and this is how I arrived to oral history, material analysis. As part of my methodology, I go around Morocco and I embroider with old Moroccan women. So I think also the craft itself is a very big part of what I'm doing. And of course, the archives are still there and are still telling some part of the story, but not the entire thing. So why embroidery? I put here a quote of Rosika Parker, which is a historian I love. To know the history of embroidery is to know the history of women. So this was my first intuition when I stumbled upon Prosperical's book. Embroidery is a sphere that belongs to women in many ways. And we'll touch in a second exactly what type of embroidery I'm talking about. And of course, there are different types of embroideries that also men are doing. And within the sphere of textile embroidery, which I focus on, there are men, but all in all, there is this very special sphere that is created. And when I first arrived to Morocco, I think everything clicked. I learned the expression that I put also in the presentation, khaditu malzel. Khaditu malzel, it's literally, it means spinning the yarn and talking. This is what women used to do. They used to sit together, spin the yarn, and talk. But nowadays in Morocco, it kind of became this thing that described every activity that is done while talking. You can be with friends, cook together, and talk. You can do jogging, gossip about the news. This is Khaditu Malzel, and I think it captures a lot of what I'm trying to describe here. You're sitting together, you're doing some craft that it's much more than decorative, as I said, and you're creating this connections, you're creating these knots. So the knots are both physically in the embroidery itself, but also between the people and specifically between the women that sits and embroider. The picture that I put here are of Moroccan women. It's dated to 1985. In an embroidery workshop that will not touch. It's a different part of my study. We will not get to it now, but there were different types of embroidery workshop throughout the history, and we can see exactly that. Those women that are sitting together, sitting outside, which is an important thing I learned when I started to embroider with them, mainly because of the light situation. So indoors, they didn't used to have good lighting. In many houses in Morocco, it still is the case, and you need very good light when you embroider. So this is one of the things that you start to pay attention when you start to embroider yourself. I would also say, usually, and Lior experienced that in the conference, I circulate hoops and fabrics and needles and threads in my talks because I'm a great believer that you need to touch the materials. You need to try the craft by yourself in order to understand part of what I'm trying to tell. So we cannot do it here in the presentation, but I hope that the things I'm telling you here will spark something in you and you will go afterwards and try to embroider something. Okay, so as I said, the types of embroideries that I'm dealing with are textile embroideries, which in Morocco, textile embroideries are specifically dedicated to this women's sphere that I'm talking about. Only women are doing textile embroidery. I put here what is not embroidery. So I think the first thing to say, which I encountered quite a lot, embroidery is not weaving. A lot of people confuse the two. Weaving is creating the fabric, basically, or the carpet. And embroidery, for me, is having the thread go through the fabric. So it's two completely different things. Other thing that I'm not touching upon is those things that I put on the left side of the presentation. If you traveled in Morocco or if you encountered some of the kaftan, the traditional dresses in Morocco, you might have seen that. The names of those decorations of the fabric is dars and randa. You create it with the same thread and the same needle that you create the embroidery with, but it's a type of needle crochet. So it's again a different technique, a different method, a different craft. So this is also something that I'm not doing, but it's beautiful. So I wanted to put it in the presentation. And the second thing that I'm not dealing with, but is amazing and fascinating as well, is golden thread or silver thread embroidery. And I put here a couple of examples. This was used usually to embellish sacred things, decorating synagogues, decorating mosques. The picture in the center that you can see from a private collection I stumbled upon, it's tefillin bags. So when a boy would get to the age of 13, he would get this very beautiful embellished tefillin bag. We usually have the name of the boy that celebrated his bar mitzvah. Sometimes we have the year, which is amazing. And this type of embroidery was not preserved only for women. In Morocco, also men did and are still doing this type of embroidery. So just positioning us in time, we're talking about the end of the 19th century and throughout the 20th century. The place, of course, is Morocco, and the type of materials are textile materials. And now I'll show you a bit what I'm talking about. So I created this map. Something very special about Morocco is that it has very different styles of embroidery, and they differ in the materials, in the stitch, in the colors, in the design. And we'll see it in a second. In a territory that is not that big, especially compared to Algeria, the next door neighbor, it has many types of embroideries that were preserved for centuries in those very, very specific geographical units. So when I say Moroccan embroideries, I mean embroideries and not embroidery. There is no one type of embroidery. And I would also talk about communities and not community. So you will see that also in my talk, I'm not going to give you this like grand explanation of what is Jewish Moroccan embroidery, because there is no one Jewish Moroccan embroidery, and each community had its own style. So we need to think about that. I think we tend to generalize because it's easier, but I think for the purposes of this talk, it's important to distinguish between the different types of embroideries and the different communities. So jumping right into it from north to south. In the north, we have Tetuan, as you can see. It's an embroidery that is done usually by silk threads on silk. It depicts those floral patterns, and each shape, each geometrical shape is outlined by the tajira, this black line that make it more distinct. This embroidery is was influenced by the Ottoman Empire embroidery. In the left corner, I put an Ottoman embroidery, and you can see the similarities both in the technique and in the design itself. Again, we'll not go into each line of how things got to those places, but the Ottoman Empire reached until Algeria, basically. They never controlled Morocco, but the border was so close, and people immigrated between the two places quite a lot, and this is how this embroidery arrived to Tetuan. A second northern city, it's about 40 minutes drive from Tetuan, is Chefchaouen. So we have those very, very close cities, and you can see completely different design, completely different stitch. We're seeing here embroidery that is done by very dense braided stitch that covers big, big surfaces. The colors are similar, which is important to note, but the design, the geometrical shapes, the use of the embroidered objects are completely different. Going a bit south, we get to Fez. So in Fez, we have this very special counted stitch. To those who don't do embroidery. So the counted stitch is not counting the stitch itself, it's counting the lines of the fabric. And the amazing thing that happens when you do that is that the backside and front side of the fabric is exactly the same. You cannot distinguish between the two. The embroiderers don't sketch the design before, they memorize the pattern, and they know that they need to go 3 dots to the right, then 2 dots down, then diagonally, and this is how they do it. So this is Fez. Less than 30 minutes from Fez, we have Meknes. So we have the same type of stitch, but as you can see, the color palette is completely different. Meknes is much more colorful. I'll just go back for a second. In Fez, it's monochromatic. You don't find any embroidery that is more than one color. The designs are sometimes similar, sometimes a bit different. The stitch is the same, but as you can see, everything else is different. Going to the coastal line, we have Rabat. Again, very different designs. We have those floral patterns with a simple satin stitch that covers those big, big surfaces or fabric, very, very colorful embroidery. And just next to Rabat, we have Saleh. So Saleh and Rabat are separated by a very, very narrow river. I would tell you that my grandparents were from Morocco, and my grandpa lived in Rabat. And when we were kids, he used to tell us how he would swim from Rabat to Saleh every day, and this was like this heroic story. But when I arrived there, I was like, oh, this is pretty small river, and I think I could also cross it by swimming. But so it's very, very close, and again, very different type of embroideries, completely different designs, completely different color palettes. We see again the braided stitch that we saw up in the north in Chefchaouen, but again, completely different designs. We also have, I have to say, under-researched embroideries from the High and Anti-Atlas. So the High and Anti-Atlas are the place where a lot of Berber or Amazigh tribes are settled, and each tribe has its own unique aesthetic traditions. So the ones I put here are from two different places, but we have much more. And again, it's a blind spot also in my research, I have to admit, even though it's amazing embroideries that are not well mapped, unfortunately. And the last type of embroidery is the one from Azmul. Again, my favorite city for all kind of reasons, partially because the embroidery is insane. And here we see for the first time figural embroidery. We have figures, we have animals, we have those mythical creatures that we don't see in any other type of embroidery, and I'll say more broadly any type of other craft in Morocco, and we'll go back to it more in the end, I promise. So how do we read nonverbal sources? As part of my research, I tried to claim that embroidery is a language. I love to bring those samplers. So samplers are a method of teaching embroidery. So young girls would go, it depends in what area we're talking about, but they would go to the ma'alma, the teacher, or to the workshop, and they would do for days and days and days those homework sheets. This is what we're witnessing here. So you start with a very, very basic stitch that you can see above, and when you perfect it, you can go to the second line where is it a bit more complicated, and then this is how you go on. So for me, those samplers are a good metaphor for a language because we have in the first line, we have the letters. We have basic letters that then create those sentences that when we perfect the sentences, we can create those beautiful, beautiful essays or even books with those complicated, creative combinations. So this is a beautiful metaphor, but how do we read embroidery? This nonverbal source that contains so much is a lot of time very hard to understand to people who don't speak the language, which is all of us. In my research, and this is what I'll try to demonstrate now, I try to claim that reading this nonverbal source, meaning that we need to do and to use different types of methodologies and read them all together. We're still having blind spots even when we do this, but we can try and understand those embroideries and what they're telling as much as we can. Okay, works. So I want to demonstrate those methodologies, those diverse methodologies that I use by 3 different stories. Okay. So as I was telling you, I look at communities and not a community. So the first one that I want to talk about is the Jewish community in Tangier. So I was living in Morocco for almost a year, trying to map the different types of embroidery, trying to trace women that still know the craft, document this craft in their private collections, trace public collections, document and catalog them. And my method was pretty simple. I would get to a new city, I would go to the old part of the city, target elderly women, and go to them and present myself and tell them what I'm doing and ask them if they know embroidery or know someone that knows embroidery. I think it could only work in Morocco. What would usually happen is that in a second, literally a second, I would get this like network of connections. People will take me by the hand, introduce me to people, and this is how I would start building those network. In Tangier, if you can remember, there is no specific type of embroidery. So I came there and I was a bit skeptical what I can find. And when I tried this method, it didn't lead me to a lot of places. So I was just like wandering the old Medina, and I stumbled upon Bet Knesset, a synagogue, and the name was Synagogue Assayag. So I was destined to go in and understand if I have any family connection. So I went in. The synagogue does not work anymore. The Jewish community in Tangier and in general in Morocco is very, very small. but the Jewish community there decided to turn most of those synagogues into museums. So I went in and they did a really, really amazing job, and I was walking around, going up to the second floor, and then I encountered this. I brought here a few examples of what I call embroidered blessings. So the entirety of the second floor was covered with those framed, you can see in the middle, this very fancy frame of embroidered blessings. At first, I saw mostly the blessings for weddings, but as we will see, it's not only for weddings. And I was just fascinated by those blessings for the reason I will tell you now. So again, how do I read embroideries? So first of all, I'll try to do the analysis of the embroidery. I'll try to interview Moroccan women about them, and I'll see if there is anything in the archives about it. When I did the embroidered blessings analysis, there are several things that I noticed right away. So first of all, it's written, which we don't get a lot. So I could have both the names sometimes of the embroiderers, the one that dedicated the embroidery to the synagogue, and the year, which is two priceless things for an historian. I encountered those massive collections of embroidery that I don't know who did it. I can guess when it was done, but usually I cannot know the specific year. And here I have those two precious things, which is amazing. And more than that, I was fascinated by Moshe. So Moses, it's very easy to distinct that it's Moses. First of all, because sometimes they just write Moshe underneath, or because he holds the Luchot HaBrit, and because he has horns. I think I was so fascinated by the horns because, again, I'm at a synagogue. This was created by a Jewish woman. I have her name. And this symboling of Moshe as Moshe by the horns, it's a very Christian aesthetic tradition. And I put here those two quite well-known examples, but we have so many more. And again, we'll not get too much into it because I'm sure all of you know it. But as an historian, for me, it's important. This mistranslation of V'karnu or Panav became this aesthetic manifestation of horns, actual horns. And we go back, we're in a Jewish community in Morocco. So this is a very European Christian tradition of depicting Moshe, and we have it in the blessings. So I think this is something very important to notice. The second thing, and this is something, so I'm currently in Spain. I was in a conference all dedicated to embroidery worldwide. And you can see that the depiction of flowers, again, we saw floral designs in Moroccan embroideries, but it didn't look like the ones we see in the embroidered blessings. And I bring you here, it's like right out of the oven. I just took those pictures a few days ago. This tradition of insane hand embroideries in Lorca, where when I attended the conference. I will, if you want to ask later, I'll be happy to tell you about those embroideries, but it's very unrelated to what I'm doing. But you can see this like tradition of flowers that we can see in Spain, but more broadly in Europe, those like very dense floral pattern that kind of frame the whole scene. So we can see those connections here. As I was telling you, here, I don't have answers. So if someone have answers, I would be very happy to say. When we read the blessings themselves, we can see that they're multifunction. We have blessings on the same embroidered piece. We have blessings for a blessing for a wedding and a blessing for the brit. I was trying to interview women, some of them that I knew are connected to the women who created those embroideries. Why did it happen? Why was it those two very different occasions that are not happening at the same time at all? And no one had an answer. My assumption is that you work so hard on this piece that you will not create two of them. You will do it for two different occasions, and people will just bore it to each occasion that they need. And this is how I can explain it. But if anyone has any other explanation, I would be more than happy to hear that. And the last part, so we have the material analysis, the oral history of me trying to understand how to read those better, and the archival work. So the archival work didn't tell me much. I did found a very interesting collections of photographs in the Israel Museum. It's photographs of Moroccan synagogues all across Morocco. And something that I found out there is that similar type of embroideries were also done in Essaouira, Mogador, so very far away from Tangier, in the south, also on the coastal line, but in the south of Morocco. I couldn't find any remnants to this. I could see in blurred picture that this is that this was happening, but again, a dead end or something that I will hopefully in the future understand better. So this was the first story, the community in Tangier. My second story is the Jewish community in Meknes. So as I was showing you before, and I'll skip the typical Meknesi embroidery is this one. Yet when I started to interview women in Israel, Moroccan women in Israel, I encountered this type of embroidery. So as you can see, it's very far from what is known as embroidery in Meknes. It's what we can call European embroidery, 100%. It's done usually by cross stitch or simple satin stitch. This type of white on white embroidery is something that we don't find in Morocco. The story behind those specific embroideries is the story of Fanny. Fanny was born in Morocco and immigrated to Israel in the 50s, carrying this with her. She learned this type of embroidery in high school. The schools that were common for the Jewish girls back then were the Alliance schools. When going to the Alliance archive, I found also those home economic classes that they did. There's also a lot of written materials about it, but part of educating a young girl was teaching her how to sew, how to embroider, and no one thought at any point to teach them the local Moroccan embroidery. It was part of the French schooling system, and this is what they learned. And it's also important to note that the embroideries in the work of Alliance in Morocco was from the 1870. So they arrived to Morocco quite a few years before the formal colonial system, something that and almost 90% of Jewish Moroccan girls that went to school went to Alliance school. And we can say, quite frankly, that they erased the local Moroccan traditions of embroidery. And most of the women that still know embroidery nowadays from those Jewish communities know that what they learned in the Alliance school. It's to the point that their mother, because the early beginning of the Alliance in Morocco, their mothers also didn't know the traditional embroidery and could not pass it on to their daughters. It differs between cities and rural areas. It's not 100% what I was telling you, but just to the matter of this talk, we'll stick to it. Later on, we also have alt professional schools that join this and kind of add to the same curriculum of very Western embroideries. And the third story, I promised you to go back to Azmul. So I titled it "The Bizarre Case of the Embroidery in Azmur." It's bizarre because we don't have figural embroideries in Morocco. We don't have figures within any craft in Morocco. And here, not only that we have those figures, they're like mythical and they're bizarre. And like you have this dragon and these monsters. You also have women. You can see them like hanged. I don't know if you can see my mouse when I point, but in the central picture, they hang from the bottom and from the top. And I was fascinated by it. The oral tradition tells that those are those designs are the outcome of the fact that the Jewish community in Azmur that does not exist anymore. They're the one that created those embroideries. I couldn't verify it, and again, if someone has any leads on that, I will be happy. But I think it's very hard to distinguish between the creations of the Jewish community and the Muslim ones within those geographical territories. And I started to try and trace where did it come from. The first place that I thought to check was Portugal. The region of Azmur was ruled by Portugal between the 15th and the 16th centuries. But this led to a dead end. Nothing in the Portuguese aesthetics and nothing in the Portuguese embroidery is similar to this. So I started to broaden my my search, and very interestingly, I found the answer in Italy. So I just want to show you a few examples and then try to convince you that my explanation is the right one. But you can see those two patterns that are almost the same. It's the same in the colors, it's the same in the design. It's not the same in the type of stitch, which I think it's important to note. But this type of design of empty figure and the background that is densely embroidered is something that is very common. Another example of very, very similar patterns. And finally, the dragon, which is now the most common embroidery in Azmur. When I encountered this one, the multi-headed monster, as I called it, I was really perplexed. The other ones I could assign to specific figures, but this one was very much a mystery. And I decided to go to Italy and specifically to Assisi, where I found the most similarities between the embroideries. Only when I arrived there, I could figure out this mystery. So again, as I did in every place, I'm sorry, I just see that my battery is low, so I'm going to quickly connect to.
I guess you didn't plug in time, but I hope she'll be back soon. Um, uh, do we want to pause the recording? Welcome back, Elya. Please unmute.
I'm so sorry. In the highest of the suspension. Yeah. Sorry for that. Technology. Okay, we're back on. I arrived to Assisi, not knowing any Italian. And I started to target again elderly women. And with Google Translate, I succeeded to arrive to this amazing woman that, not knowing the same language, we still were able to connect because we both love embroidery very much. So it was very magical to do that. Her name is Raffaella Bartolucci, and she learned the craft of embroidery from her mom. And over the years, she published several books about specifically the Assisi embroidery, not the Asmori one. And when I showed her the Asmori embroidery, she was shocked. So she shared with me her books, first of all, and her collections. And in her collections, some of the things that we saw similar is from her collections, but she showed me this amazing thing. So from the left, we can see a weaved cover. And when I first saw that, I was like, this is interesting. I'm not into weaving, I'm into embroidery. But this pole, this decorated pole that separates between those men riding on horses holding a bird, it looks familiar. And then she told me that a lot of times in Assisi, the embroidery was the option that poor women did because they didn't have the loom, they didn't have the ability to own a loom. So they translated the weaving into embroidery, and then she showed me an example of an embroidery. And something about the deconstruction here. Look at the squares, little squares inside the horse. Look at those poles that separate between. Got me to figure out that this is actually a man riding on a horse holding a bird. So this like multi-legged figure that we have here is actually four legs belonging to the horse, two to the rider. The multiple head situation is one belonging to the horse, one to the rider, and one to the bird or whatever was translated here. And then we have those poles, decorated poles that separate between each figure. I especially love this example because it goes back to what I'm trying to argue. Embroidery is a language. a language can be translated. So when the embroidery passed between those two places, and I'll touch quickly upon that in a second, women from both places translated it into their aesthetic language, their aesthetic tradition. And I think so there are a couple of explanations to how those were passed between places. The first explanation is trade, and here is where Jews come into picture. The Jewish community all across Morocco was very much involved in trade for many, many years. The trade specifically with Italy, and even more specifically with Sicily was very much connected between Jewish communities. So we have this general picture. I would also argue that it's not only a Jewish story in this case. And in Assisi, which is the birthplace of the Franciscan order, there is also this connection with the brothers and sisters from the order that starting in the 14th century did those pilgrimages to Morocco, just increasing more and more their presence in Morocco. And this is how I connect. This is a line that I draw between those two very small yet amazing towns. And yeah, I think just to conclude, as you can see, I was very much guided by chance and curiosity rather than a conscious strategy or a methodology that I can say I developed in advance. But I think it opened up a lot of very interesting threads that are important to study. A lot of stories that were untold until now, both because women did not write a lot of materials or no one thought it's important to preserve them in archives. And yeah, I think I would be more than happy to hear everyone's thoughts now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Elya, for a fantastic talk. I'm sure there are many questions. First, I want to invite you to submit 1 or 2 or 3 articles to Ars Judaica based on this talk. We'd be more than happy to receive those. If I could just jump in first before we go to the audience. First of all, anyone with questions, please raise your hand or push the button for raising hands. I can't resist commenting on your the last part, the talk with from Azimur with the figure. The figure you refer to as a man riding a horse holding a bird. So this is a falconer, and this is a very common motif. I happen to have written a few articles about it actually, and a doctorate. And I both agree and disagree with parts of your explanation. So I don't see that in Azimur that we have this actual representation of a man riding a horse holding a bird. There seems to be, you earlier characterized it as monsters, as like multi-headed, like a multi-headed monster. But I do agree that there is this very strong relationship between the images of the falconer that you found in Italy, in Assisi, and the image in Azimur. And you showed 2 images from Italy, one more realistic and one more abstract. So it could be that in Azimur, they were based on a more abstract image, like the one you displayed, or possibly even one even more abstract. And the falconry culture, so strong in Europe with the horseback rider, I believe that it's also in Northern Africa, but in a place like Azamor, it could very likely not be an active part of the visual culture. And so such an image could have been translated or transposed into the multi-headed monster, which does seem to be an active part of the visual culture in Azamor. So yeah, these are my feelings based on this the last part.
Thank you, Lior. I would just say, as you were talking, I completely agree. And I think as you were talking, just because of time and I want to hear yours, I didn't say what I'm usually saying in connection to this specific story of Azmor. The relations are multi-directional. I cannot prove it because of time and the fact that no one thought it's important to preserve knowledge about craft that is done by women. But as we can see in broader social processes, it's never one way. So I'm a historian of Morocco, so everything is centered about Morocco, and I'm trying to explain the origins of Morocco. But at the same time, we can say that maybe this monster was created before arrived to Assisi, and in Assisi, because it's much more based on figural and realistic traditions, aesthetic traditions, they translated it into this. I think it's super important to mention it, and your trace of analysis, which is probably being exposed to something more abstract. I completely agree, and I think it's a very, very, very important point to note. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Professor Sabar, can we hear from you, please?
Yes,
welcome.
Hi everyone. Toda rabba for the lecture. I really enjoyed it, and I really am happy that you are doing this research. I can say from, in my advanced years that I've been working with Aviva Miller-Lancet and then Elya Ben-Ami, and I'm glad to see a new generation of young researchers joining this. I have a few remarks, mostly about the motifs and what they mean and so on. I think one general methodological issue is you cannot isolate the embroideries from the rest of Moroccan Jewish art. I mean, really, many of the motifs appear elsewhere, and you cannot really just deal with them only in the embroidery. For example, the figural representations appear also in some of the manuscripts, in the ketubot, and I mean, cannot be isolated. Also, for example, another thing is that they are from the 20th century, and by this time, there are printers in Morocco, like Yosef Lugassi and others, that are using the models from Europe all the time. I mean, whether it's from Livorno or from Amsterdam, and they're using them, and people are seeing this. They don't know if they knew what Horn Moses means in Christian art, or it's really secondary because they saw it coming from a Hebrew book from Amsterdam or Livorno, as I said, and copied it into their art. This would be something happening not only in Morocco, but also in Iraq and elsewhere in the Islamic world. So this phenomenon of the 20th century, we should consider it as such. And actually, Horn Moses is already in Jewish art for several centuries, so it's not something so new to Jewish art in general. Another thing that I wanted to mention is about let's say, the embroidery for the wedding from Tangier is almost like imitation of a ketubah from Algiers. I mean, you look at the ketubot of Tangier, you see exactly the same pattern of flowers, like a wreath of flowers on both sides of the text, like in your embroidery, a crown at top with the same inscription. So all this world is like very much interconnected. So I would not isolate the items. And the last note is the fact that in Mogador you find similar motifs to Tangier is not surprising because remember the community of Mogador, of Essaouira, was comprised of people who came from Sephardi towns from the north, like it's a sort of artificial community that was established late in the history of Moroccan Jewry. And they came with these traditions from wherever they came, mostly Sephardi ones. And I think the Sephardi element is very strong in many of the items that you shown. That's it, basically. Maybe there are other points I don't remember now, but these are the main points that I wanted to mention.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the amazing articles and books that you wrote that are very much in use in my study. I completely agree, and the context is broader and yeah, in the chapters I refer to it for sure. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Miriam, you have a...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Elya. This was really a very interesting lecture and giving new insights in women's work and women's embroidery. But I would like a little bit to go in the direction of what Shalom said. Why did you research that, and how would you explain maybe now shortly why there are such huge differences between the cities you showed us? Where is this connected to which city was absorbing certain influences, like for instance, what Shalom now said with Tangier, using Lubot as a source, or other cities using some other local histories that would influence then the embroidery as it looks now? How do you explain this difference?
So this is a great question. This is actually what stands in the center of my study, which is the transfer of knowledge. Here I thought it's more relevant to touch upon the artistic aspects of it because of the forum. But for centuries, the way knowledge was transferred was either between generations, from mother to daughter. And if the mother, for some reason, didn't know the embroidery, there was a local ma'alma, a local teacher. It was kind of a sweatshop, actually, situation where there was this woman, sometimes within each neighborhood, it depends on the size of the city, and the young girls were sent there. We have pictures of girls from 5-year-old and up for days and days. This is what they would do, and this is how the knowledge would transfer. And this is how we have up until the beginning of the 20th century, those very specific geographical pods that kept those traditions. This is in general. When the presence of Europeans increases, it changes those methods of knowledge transfer. It changes it in all different ways. And it started, as I said, it started way before the formal colonial presence. So I think, as Professor Saval said, we have those communications through printed things. We have those communications through commerce and trade. So we start to get this things as early as the 14th, 15th century of materials that are circulating in specific ways from specific times. I have like all kind of things along my study, but there are influences that we can see, or those communications that we can see between Morocco and India. Like there are similar types of stitches and models that we can see that go through, and then the Portuguese story comes back in the 15th century and the trade route that they created. So we have all those things infiltrating to this like basic system of knowledge transfer. In each case, again, and this is why I think it's important to talk about communities, even when we talk about the Jewish community, the big Jewish community, because in each place there are different explanations. Some I can trace, some are gone forever probably, but I think this is like in general what I'm claiming in my research. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Well, partially, but since it's a work in progress, I'm sure you'll get there also. Thank you.
Would it be safe to say that there was just like an ancient or diversity in the region that's just been preserved? Is that what you're?
Diversity in what sense?
Different traditions of one region preserving many different different traditions in the sub-regions from which go back many centuries. Like the question Miriam asked was, why is there so much diversity in such a small geographical region? Unit. Yeah. So like we would expect that there would be kind of like a fermentation, a crossbreeding, a contamination, if you will, between one region to another region, and we don't find that here. We find so many distinct types that it seems to me like it might be the product. The reason why is that the distinctions between the regions are very old. Each region developed its own traditions, and the transportation. There certainly was transportation between different regions, but the travel and transportation was not enough to destroy the uniqueness of the individual subregions.
Yeah, I think, like, as you were talking, I was thinking again about my language metaphor. I think in some cases, for sure, we're talking about different tribes. We're talking about, so we have like those Berber tribes, the Amazigh tribes that have completely different background and come from completely different places. We have the Arab tribes that come later on, and then we have the Megorashim that arrive to the same geographical unit, and each are preserving some basic traditions. But I think, if we go back to the language metaphors in many social processes, some of it is inherent, some of it is acquired. If we talk about language, we can talk about regional dialects. So some of it, it's how they used to talk for centuries, and some of it is things that they picked from their very immediate surrounding, or some slang that was brought because someone lived abroad and brought it back. Like we can have all of this. So I think it's both. It's both this like basic or inherent uniqueness, and then the things that add up that are preserved within those very, very tight mechanisms of knowledge transfer, as I try to describe in my research.
Great, thanks. Professor Ritchie.
First of all, I must say that your fascination was extremely, extremely attractive. And when heard the word fascinating again and again in your presentation, and I can see that you are fascinated by it. I want to come back to something different, and that is your theoretical way of working. And what do you really want to achieve in this work? In other words, are you interested in the embroidery as embroideries, or are you interested in bringing these embroideries to tell us something about the communities, about these women? And I was wondering what kind of theoretical you brought. At the end, you brought Carlo Ginzburg. At the beginning, you brought this barber, I think. But I still feel that I don't know exactly how you're going about this. In other words, you're taking these embroideries as the major sources, if I understand you correctly. And from them, you want to teach us more about, not necessarily about how these are done. Now, Shalom is interested in trying to make the comparisons with other material objects. I'm wondering, what are you specifically interested in showing? And how you're going about to do that? Because the archives seem to be rather meaningless in the end. You mentioned the archives, but you didn't think that the archives were actually helping you. So I would like to hear more about this theoretical way of working, and what is your eventual goal in this? Is this a historical, an art historical? How would you see yourself in this context? But I was fascinated just to see the wonderful facial expressions when you talked about this work, and one could see how excited you are by what you've been finding. And of course, finding more and more Assayags in Morocco. Yes.
Thank you, Richie. Sharp as always and sharpening me as always. So you're totally right. My bigger project, maybe this is what I had to say in the beginning, which I didn't say. I'm a social historian. I'm not an art historian. I'm very, very grateful for art historians to welcome me into their amazing world, but I'm a social historian. Embroideries are my main source, but I'm trying to tell a social history story. I'm trying to trace how knowledge was transferred and what were the agents and the circumstances in which these mechanisms were changed. And in my bigger project, so I have what I call those colonial agents and quasi-colonial agents. It's those agents that I trust that influence the traditional way of transferring knowledge when it comes to embroidery. And those, so the colonial agents, it's easy. It's the administrators of the French and Spanish regime, and more particularly the education systems that they built in Morocco, in which you can see those home economic classes that kind of transfer how knowledge about embroidery was given to the girls attending. Surprisingly, the French system for many years, preserved the traditional craft of embroidery. It was not allowed to teach any other type of embroidery other than what was classified as traditional embroidery. So this is like a very interesting thing. But in terms of the geographical units, they did break that. So as I told, as I answered not quite successfully to Miriam's questions, those mechanisms of knowledge transfer within each geographical unit were preserved for centuries. But when the French education system came, they were like, in Marrakesh, you can teach whatever Moroccan embroidery that you want, even if it's the one from Tetuan up in the north. In Azmour, you can teach the one from Fez. Like, as long as you have the approval of the administrators that this is a traditional Moroccan embroidery, you can teach it. And this breaks this very, very small geographical units mechanisms. So we have this. And then we have the what I call quasi-colonial agents. So Alliance, for example, it's a very good example of a quasi-colonial agents. It's those agents that are not part of the formal administration, colonial administration, but they are carrying the same methods, the same values of the colonial regime, and this is why we see this erasure in many ways of traditions regarding to embroidery. Another fascinating quasi-colonial agent that I traced is the Franciscan Sisters Order. So I mentioned it very, very briefly when it came to Assisi, but in the beginning of the 20s, this order starts to send those sisters that sits in major locations in Morocco, learn the language of the local people, whether it's Darija, the Moroccan Arabic, or the Amazigh languages. And their mission is to help women. I would say nowadays we will call it empower women. They used to talk about it in terms of giving women independence. And it came in all kind of forms. One of the main forms was establishing weaving and embroidery workshops where they taught women traditional Moroccan embroidery. So you get those like Christian nuns, Catholic nuns that are teaching Moroccan women how to embroider Moroccan embroidery. And here we have one of the major shifts in terms of aesthetics, because those sisters decided, due to historical reasons of one sister that was the first one to choose what is Moroccan embroidery, they decided that only the fez embroidery is the one they're going to teach. And you have this spread of their workshops all over Morocco, teaching only the fez/meknes embroidery. So this was one major shift. And the second one was that they wanted to help women be independent. So they adapted the type of embroideries, the type of object you embroider on, to the taste of the Europeans that started to come and be tourists in Morocco. So from this like very dense, I don't know if you remember, very dense embroideries that we have in Fez, like 2-meter fabric, all covered. We got this like very white fabric with like a decoration here, decoration there, that really shifts the aesthetics. Yeah, and nowadays when you go in Moroccan markets and you ask to buy traditional Moroccan embroidery, this is what you get. You get the Franciscan sister adaptation to Moroccan embroidery, actually.
Thank you. I'll just throw in a quick comment. At the Yad Ben Tzvi conference, there was one of the other talks. I don't know if you were there that day. It was about Yemen and Sana, about like this sort of, someone decided that Sana was a representative of Yemenite visual culture, and so you see it in the Israel Museum. But there's really this wide variety of art methods or designs from all over Yemen, and this is just one of them, and each one they're also distinct. This also seems similar to the situation that you're describing. Professor Sabar.
I mean, most of what I wanted to say has already been said, but I want to emphasize this last point that you said. We think about Jewish art mostly based on the models that we know from Europe. But in the Islamic lands, it was also a lot of diversity. I mean, what Elya is saying and what you mentioned just now about Yemen is true. I mean, in Morocco lived many kinds of Jews. I mean, it's like different nations. I don't know how to define it, but these are like such different cultures. Only when they came to Israel, they were all identified as Moroccan Jews by mistake, or even confusing between Moroccan and Tunisian Jews and so on. There are such big differences. I mean, I can tell you from, I don't know, easily when I see fields that I know better, Hanukkah lamps, from which town exactly it comes in Morocco, or from the villages in the Atlas Mountains, because there are such big differences in the style and the iconography and so on. But we don't know this more about this enough, unfortunately, in Israel. So I really strengthen your hands in this research that you are doing to localize the motifs now in embroidery, because these are really this was until the 20th century. You would immediately know by the appearance of a person from which part of the country it is in Morocco and so on. And we have so many examples of this, actually, evidence for that, even from French ethnographers and so on that visited Morocco. So, just to another point that would help in your theory is, I'm sure you know, but just to emphasize again, maybe, that Bracha Yaniv has already worked on the connection between North Africa in general, and Morocco in particular, and Italy. So she shows influences in the style of the rimonim and some of the furniture and so on. So I would recommend to go back to her work. I mean, I don't remember now if she also worked on how this came to be, these connections, but certainly there are. I mean, so the Italian influence that you show now is not surprising, but it's another evidence to show that this was going on, and the Moroccan Jews were not isolated as we tend to think and so on. And so, again, congratulations for everything, and just keep doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, Bracha Yaniv don't explain the connection.
Yes, it doesn't. Yeah, I didn't remember, but I wanted to.
But her work is I think it adds, like, when we will have enough of those examples, it will be a fuller argument. And I wish that in a few years I would also sit with a lot of embroideries hanged on my wall, like your Chanukiot.
Yes.
Very
for which town,
inspirational.
For which village you need one.
Very inspirational.
Yeah, definitely.
מקום הניחו לנו אבותינו ואמותינו להתגדר בה.
נכון, exactly.
Continue. We have just a few minutes left. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Should we announce next week's talk?
Okay. Yes, just a moment. I have a quick note about it. I just stopped recording. So maybe thank you.